Very good.
So in the last chapter,
I'm tired now.
he wore himself out.
We'll do that with Miss Graves too.
You should. So listen up. So in the last couple chapters, we found out that Mr. Hampton's art is going to a museum, but it's getting put in storage. He goes back to the garage one last time, and he takes the shopping cart, and then he finds on the floor this little piece of cardboard.
7 years later.
6, right? Oh, 7. Oh, yeah. I wrote.
He's like a grown man now. Yeah.
So, yeah, he'd be like 21 now, yeah.
Wait, like today he'd be 21.
No.
Well,
1960.
yeah, so this would be like, it would be like this 1970, I think.
What page are we on?
We're going to talk about that.
What page are we on?
Soon.
260.
So,
266?
guys,
Do I guess that page?
let me finish my summary real quick. So he goes back to the garage, he takes the cart and kind of like remembers the stuff that Mr. Hampton said to him. And then as he's leaving, he sees this little piece of cardboard on the floor. And he's like, oh, maybe he's sending me a message. But he's like, no, that's stupid. And then he picks it up anyway. And on one side, there's some foil. And it says, fear not. So now we're on 7 years later. This is 266. We have 2 quick chapters to read. And so now he would be 20. Was it just his 14th birthday? Is that right? Okay, so now he would be 20. So this is 266. 7 years later. Arthur didn't want to wear a suit to the reception. His mom insisted. This is a big deal, she said. I don't care if you're too grown up for me to fuss over anymore. I want you looking nice. I want to be proud of you. She tugged on the sleeves of the dark blue suit jacket and smoothed the fabric across his broad shoulders. He was 21 now, there you go, and as tall as his father had been, and he had his father's stubbornness about getting dressed up for anything. There, it fits you perfectly, look. Arthur's mom spun him around to face the mirror in the bathroom. You are handsome enough to make me cry. Her voice trembled a little, and Arthur rolled his eyes. Please, Mom. Roger, Barbara, come look at Arthur. His mom called before he could stop her. Top of 267. Of course, Roger had to stick his head in the tiny bathroom with Barbara right behind him. So I'm assuming they've been together for a long time, maybe are married now? I don't know. Yeah, so they've been together for quite a while. And Barbara's like probably pretty old now. She's probably like...
17, 18.
She's 14? Okay.
It says it at the bottom of the chart.
Oh, it does? Oh, nice. Okay. Where am I? They were both decked out for the occasion, too. Barbara was wearing a yellow dress with a big summer hat and white gloves, which Arthur thought was a little over the top, but she was 14, and you couldn't tell her anything these days. Now all you need is a nice girl to marry, Artie, she teased. Oh, you be quiet, his mom scolded. Actually, Arthur did have a nice girl he was dating. Her name was Carol, and he'd met her at the city college where he was taking a couple of classes in design and architecture. But he wasn't spilling the beans about going out with her, not yet, which was typical of Arthur. Jiminy, everybody looks awfully sharp, Roger said. Like Arthur, he was wearing a suit, the same one he'd worn when he'd married Arthur's mom at the courthouse 4 years before. Okay. Arthur had been his best man. Oh, that's really sweet. Are you sure I look all right? Arthur's mom peered anxiously into the bathroom mirror. She was wearing too much blue eyeshadow and her hair was pulled kind of high on her head, but Arthur told her she looked perfect. The 4 of them got into Roger's white Cadillac to go to the reception. He'd had the white walls scrubbed and the leather seats cleaned. The car smelled of lemons. Arthur would have preferred to drive there himself, but his mom wanted all of them to arrive together. He suspected she was afraid he wouldn't show up on time. The reception started at 6, and Arthur was always late. The first person Arthur spotted when they pulled into the parking lot downtown was Squeak, which made him relax a little. So they're on their way to some sort of reception currently. Like, everyone's going.
It's like definitely gonna be like bad now. Bad.
What?
Like bad. As in,
Yo,
like,
Carol's my grandma.
Like something bad's gonna happen?
No, like he's gonna be like bad.
A bad boy.
Like bad boy.
If this is a true story.
Like, is that good?
No, I mean.
No, like as in like a rebel. Like
Oh,
If this is
I
my-
see.
If this is a true story, we're talking to my grandmother is dating Arthur.
Oh my god.
Wait, what if they are?
Alright.
what?
So they pull into the parking lot. Squeak is there. Arthur had invited him, and he'd driven down from Boston to be there. He was heavier and rounder now, with thicker black glasses. But he was still Squeak. Once Roger had the car safely in the space, Arthur leaped out to flag him down. Squeak, Squeak. Squeak looked confused and embarrassed. You made it, Arthur said, pounding him on the back. Good to see you, man. They hadn't seen each other much since the end of high school. Squeak was going to Boston College, majoring in physics, of course. Reginald, not Squeak, Squeak said, smiling wider. I wouldn't have recognized you. You look like a preacher or something in that fancy suit. I know, Arthur grinned. I feel like an idiot in it. So, you excited for tonight? Squeak pointed at the entrance of the art museum, where a crowd of well-dressed people was already lined up on the big steps, waiting for the reception. A colorful banner saying Hampton's Throne opening soon flapped in the warm evening breeze. I'm not sure yet, replied Arthur, which was the truth. Top of 269. It had been 7 years since he'd last seen Hampton's Throne, 7 years since he'd been a juvenile delinquent with a probation officer, 7 years since he'd gone around the neighborhood collecting the 7 most important things with a grocery cart, more than 7 years since his dad had died. It was so long ago it didn't even feel like his own life when he thought about it, but he knew there would be a few people at the reception to remind him. Groovy Jim was there. Arthur had called the shop to let him know about the event, and he could already spot him in the crowd, a tall, hippie-ish guy with his mop of curly hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Arthur's mom had tracked down Officer Billy, who was now working as a security guard. She did a lot to help you, Arthur's mom reminded him. At least we should try to let her know. Officer Billy told Arthur's mom she'd already heard about the exhibit opening. Of course, Arthur thought she knew everything. Officer Billy said she was pretty sure Judge Warner would be there because he was a board member of the museum. So this is like the opening. It's the first time they're putting it on display. So it's been in storage for 7 years. But Arthur couldn't believe the story when he heard it from his mom. A board member? Judge Warner had seemed like the last person on earth who would be interested in art. The rest of the people in the crowd were strangers to Arthur, museum staff and patrons and guests, people who had a lot of money to spare by the looks of their stylish clothes and jewelry. Top of 270. Arthur was suddenly glad his mother had insisted on the suit. The museum had asked Arthur to be a part of the ribbon-cutting group for the opening of the exhibit. There were 5 people in the group. One of them turned out to be Judge Warner. He was introduced as the Honorable Philip Warner, a board member and lifelong friend of the museum, just as Officer Billy had said. From brick throwing to ribbon cutting, the judge whispered to Arthur with a half smile as he handed out the scissors to everyone. Now that's what I call redemption. Even 7 years later, he could still make Arthur nervous. On the count of 7, Arthur's suggestion, they cut the silver ribbon across the entrance to the exhibit. Cameras flashed as the bits of ribbon fluttered to the floor. The crowd watching in the hallway clapped. And then it was time to walk through the wide marble doorway to see Mr. Hampton's masterpiece on display for the first time. This was the moment Arthur had been most afraid of. He was worried Hampton's Throne would look smaller and less spectacular than he remembered. Top of 271. The way things from your past often did. Had the pieces really filled half of a garage once? Would people understand why heaven had been made out of junk? Would they see what Hampton had been trying to do? He didn't need to worry. As the crowd entered the room behind him, there was a soft gasp. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Mr. Hampton's masterpiece looked far better, far more beautiful than he remembered. In the darkened room, the red chair Arthur found for Mr. Hampton years before filled the center, like a radiant throne. Around it, the foil-wrapped tables and chairs and pedestals and pillars sparkled in the spotlights. Metallic wings stretched outward, stars caught the light, and at the top of it all, above the glittering thrones and tables and pillars, was a small cardboard sign Arthur wanted everyone to see, "Fear not." For a long time, Arthur stood at the side of the room watching as the museum guests filed in. He noticed how they spoke in hushed whispers as they entered the darkened space, and how they stepped forward to look at the intricate pieces more closely, then back, as if trying to grasp the scene from a distance, forward and back, like a dance. Arthur found it hard to resist pointing out to people that there was no way of seeing everything, no matter how close or far away you were from Mr. Hampton's work. Top of 272. Or how many hours you stared at it. Some things in this world were meant to remain a mystery. The line to see Hampton's Throne stretched out the door and down the hallway. It moved slowly. And just as Mr. Hampton had said, the people kept coming. At the reception later, Officer Billy came over to give Arthur a round metal tin. "I've switched from caramel corn to cookies," she told him. "Chocolate chip. Hope you like them." "Thank you," Arthur said, remembering to make eye contact and sound grateful. He'd learned a few things from Officer Billy 7 years earlier.
I wish she's not that.
She's probably pretty old.
She's probably like in her 90s.
I don't think she's that old. It's only 7 years later. I bet she's like in her 50s. Yeah.
Kane and Arthur
Yeah.
makes a mistake, beats Arthur the Kane.
Stop it. All right, middle of 272. Groovy Jim stopped by to tell Arthur and Squeak that they should come and get a tattoo at his shop sometime. I could always use the business, he joked. Hey, I just got one, Squeak said, rolling up his sleeve to show it off. Look. Groovy Jim and Arthur had to squint to see what it was. It looked like a tiny smudge of letters on his bicep. F equals MA. Newton's second law of motion, Squeak prodded. Squeak prodded Arthur. Force equals mass times acceleration. Remember that from high school? Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, Arthur laughed. Man, I cannot believe you did that. I thought you were going to get something big and scary. That's what you always said. Squeak grinned. Trust me, getting this thing was scary enough. Top of 273, so now we have some time passing. We're at the end of the reception. Arthur and Squeak stayed until the end of the reception. It seemed like everybody had heard how they were the ones who had saved the throne. People kept coming over to ask them what Mr. Hampton had been like and what they'd done. Arthur figured he and Squeak must have told the story of the coffee cans 10 or 15 times. When Arthur and his family finally left the museum that night with the last of the guests, it was dark outside. As they came out, he couldn't help noticing the big flock of city pigeons that had gathered on the museum steps for the night. There must have been 50 birds, he thought. As the group started down the steps, the flock suddenly took off together, moving upward like one big cloud. Everyone stopped to watch them. You could hear the beat of their noisy wings lifting into the night sky, dozens upon dozens of metallic paper wings rising over the city. Arthur smiled as he watched the birds disappear into the darkness, remembering his dad again, remembering what Mr. Hampton had said. Some angels are like peacocks, others are less flashy, like city pigeons. It all depends on the wings. All right, so we are going to read the next little part because it's important. So this is the author's note. So we're now on 275. And this is like directly from the author in his experience. So we're going to read this too. You'll see. Author's note. This book began about 25 years ago when I visited a small folk art museum in Williamsburg, Virginia. I remember stepping into a darkened exhibit room, and there it was, a breathtaking world of gold and silver tables and thrones and pillars. The scene was lonely, curious, and awe-inspiring all at the same time. It wasn't until I walked closer that I realized that the art was actually made from what the art was actually made from, and saw its mysterious title. The throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly. The artwork and its unusual story have remained in my imagination ever since. Today, James Hampton's masterpiece, which is sometimes referred to as the throne of the third heaven or Hampton's throne, is on permanent exhibit in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, formerly called the National Collection of Fine Arts. It has also traveled around the country for special exhibits. You can read more about James Hampton and the little we know about his work on the Smithsonian's website. So this is all real. James Hampton is real. So is this art piece. And we're going to look at it tomorrow. It's online. So we're going to look at it. It is. This makes it really small looking.
No, but it looks much neater than how they explained it.
Like the character in the book, James Hampton was a solitary man who created his vision of heaven in an unheated garage over many years. 180 objects make up the throne. They are built of various scraps he gathered from the 7th Street neighborhood near the garage and from government buildings in Washington, D.C., where he worked as a night janitor. Discarded furniture, foil, glass bottles, mirrors, coffee cans, cardboard, and light bulbs are among the materials he used most often, which inspired the idea for the 7 most important things. One piece in the collection is labeled as having been made in 1945 on Guam, where James Hampton was stationed during World War II, though the story about its meaning is my own interpretation. So he made this story up, but that was really like from Guam and from World War II. Interestingly, Hampton wrote down some of his ideas and visions in elaborately coded notebooks, which have never been deciphered. So he had all these crazy notebooks where he wrote down all of this these plans for his artwork, but it was like all in code, so nobody's like ever been able to read them. For the purpose of the story, I used a grocery cart as James Hampton's chariot, although he was more commonly seen pulling a child's wagon or carrying a burlap sack. So he usually had a bag or a wagon.
So this,
He's real. Yeah.
but they made up the whole.
The whole rest of the story. So James Hampton is real. The art piece is real, but like Arthur and like all the other characters are fake.
No, that like it's kind of sad, honestly. Like,
Pretty crazy.
So he did it all alone.
I thought for
I
a
think
second
so.
he
Wait.
was gonna be the kid.
Let's just finish
Then
this.
this goes to Arthur.
For the purpose of the story, oh wait, sorry, I already read that. The characters of Arthur Owens, Groovy Jim, and Officer Billy are fictional, so they're fake. Unlike the landlord, but that means, I wonder if that means the others are real, because that's only Arthur, Groovy Jim, and Officer Billy. Unlike the landlord in the book, the real landlord played a role in helping to save the artwork after Hampton died in early November 1964 following a long battle with cancer. So he really died. There really was a landlord, but the landlord ended up helping. Yeah, and it was, yeah. While some details about James Hampton and his work were changed for the story, others are true to life. He did refer to himself in his writing as St. James and the director of special projects for the state of eternity. Wings and stars were important symbols in his designs. The quote, "Where there is no vision, the people perish," was found on a bulletin board in his garage. "Fear not" appears at the top of his masterpiece. So, like, the garage was real, his workspace was real, the quotes was all real.
That's crazy. This guy can see a piece of artwork and come up with this ghost story.
Yeah. Anonymous individuals really did contribute money to save the artwork after Hampton's death, and the throne was kept in storage for 7 years before going on exhibit, where it continues to intrigue and inspire visitors today. The rest is left to the imagination. All right, so that's it.